Okay, file handling. It's not hard, exactly, but there's a lot that you have to keep track of mentally when you're starting to work with files. None of the individual operations, like I said, are particularly complicated or shocking. It's just there's a lot of them. And a good way to sort of illustrate like the number of things you have to think about be a little practical demonstration. So transition's a little rough. Give me. I am a programmer, not a video editor. Okay. So hopefully the sandwich example has helped you understand a little bit better of what we're doing with files. Like I said in that little demonstration, files are just containers of data. And we're going to open those containers and manipulate the data, maybe sometimes put data in, take data out, whatever it is that we need to do with it. That is file handling. Now, there's a couple of different types of files, well, two different types of files. You have binary and text files. A text file is human readable. If I look at a text file, I can scroll through it and I can read it. So this is the file that we'll be doing when we go through and do the lecture-led demo. I can read it. It's plain text file. That's what I mean. Binary files, however, you can't look at them this way. For example, this is just a random binary file that I opened up in Notepad++. And as you can see, there's some text in here that I can see, but for the most part, this file does not make any sense. It is not human readable. Things like graphics files, executable files, just general like compressed data files, those are going to be in a binary format. We're not going to be dealing with binary format files in this class. We are just going to look at text file handling. It's just a little bit simpler in terms of how you handle them. So let's take a look at some very basic code here. The first part of this is I am going to generate 50,000 numbers. Basically, I'm going to roll 50,000 d20. In case you are curious, the underscore there just simply means I'm not actually using the values in the range. I don't actually care about the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And so I just have Python lets you put an underscore here to indicate that you don't care. You just need to repeat this for however many items are in this. So I've got a list of 50,000 things. I'm going to do this loop 50,000 times. I don't actually care what those numbers are. But backing up here a little bit, you can see here I've got an open command. And again, as a reminder, it's strongly recommended that you have read through the the W3 Schools file handling reading assignment before watching this lecture. I do assume that you have read that already. So I've got the open command. I am passing in my file name. And because I am just passing in the file name and not putting in any path information, it is assumed that it is in the same directory as the file, which it is. This Python file, lecture.py, and the file that I am opening is going to be in the same directory. And then since I need this for writing, I have to specify a W string here to indicate that I am opening this file to write. The default is text. If I wanted to write this as a binary file, I would need to say WB for write binary. But again, we're just dealing with text, so I'm accepting the defaults. I just have to specify the W. At this point, the file is open. Also remember from the documentation that whatever data existed in this file previously has now been destroyed. Randomizing C, that's fairly standard. And then finally down here, I am writing out the file. Now, just real quick here, let me comment out this because I don't want this to run. This is what I'm talking about where file handling is not hard. You just have a lot of things that you have to keep track of. I'm generating a random int, nothing we haven't seen before. Write does expect a string. I'm giving it a string, so I'm casting that number value to a string and then calling the write function. But if I leave it like this and I run it, first of all, notice how fast a computer can create 50,000 numbers and write them to a file. Computers are pretty fast these days. And then if I go over here and look at that text file, that's not going to be very usable. Where does the numbers stop and end? Is this an 8, a 1, and a 9? Or is this an 8 and a 19? I don't know. I can't tell. And that's why I have to put in a new line. That's what the \n stands for here. It is a new line character. If I don't explicitly put that in, there's not going to be any separation. When I put that in and run it, now it's numbers on individual lines. I can see what the individual roles are. Lots of different ways that I could potentially do this. This is just simply the most straightforward. This is what I mean by files are not hard, but there's a lot you have to think about. What is the format of the file? Not only how am I going to write this information, but how am I going to read this information back into process? I need to understand that as well. I need to be able to know the individual roles on this. And it just so happens that separating them out on individual lines is the most sane way of doing it. And then a close. Remember, we always need to close our file. It might not corrupt the file if you don't close it, but it also might corrupt the file if you don't close it. Always, always, always want to close our files. All right, let's comment out now. So now I have 50,000 numbers, and I want to do some basic processing on them. I want to see how good is my random number generator. Like, what is the average of these 50,000 rolls? How many ones did I roll? How many 20s? How many evens? How many odds? How many 1s and 20s do I expect to roll? It's like, I know the average. The average would be 10.5. Right? One, it just so happens if you take, 1 plus 2 plus 3, so on and so forth, plus 20, and average that all out, basically it turns out to be 10.5. So, what are these values? And I want to do this in such a way that, I don't know when writing the code how many items there are. I mean, 1,000. But what if I didn't know that? What if I was just handed a random file and I'm told each line of the file has a number on it, a roll of a d20, and do these calculations? Great. Okay. If I want to read a file line by line, one way that I can do that is for variable in file. So here I've opened the file. Always have to open a file before we use it. Just like I've got to open up the bread, I got to open up the peanut butter before I can get the peanut butter out, right? Got to open up the file before I use it, whether I'm reading or writing to it. And since I am reading a text file, I don't have to put any other modifications in. Reading a text file is the default settings for the open function. For cur line in RND input. I'm saying here's the file. This has a reference to my file, and I'm saying okay, for every line in that file, do this. And again, I have to think about it. None of these operations are hard. You just have to think about it when you're approaching files. I know every line is going to be a number. I also know that when I read that line in, it's going to be a text. I don't need text. I need numbers. So I'm going to take that line, I'm going to convert it to an integer. And then once I have that value converted into an integer, I can just go through and do all my calculations, increase my count. I can, add it into the sum, check to see if it's even. If it's not even, that means it's odd. I can check to see if it's a 1. I can check to see if it's a 20. Now, again, I put it in 2 separate if statements here. I could do an else if. I mean, if it's a 1, it's not going to be a 20, but I just put it in 2 separate if statements. Cannot be an else. I wouldn't be able to say if it's a 1, do this, else do 20 count plus. That doesn't make any sense because if it's not a 1, well, it could be a 2, right? So again, always think about your logic. And then before I do anything else, before I even calculate the average or do any printing out, as soon as I am done with the file, I close it. Again, that is very important. Have that discipline built in. As soon as you are done using a file, close it. Do not leave a file open if you do not have to, because you're just asking for trouble if something goes wrong. And then once that file is closed, I do fairly standard calculations. And as we can see, it actually works out pretty good. Now our average is 10.5 changeover, so our average is actually pretty good. Our even odd numbers are a little imbalanced. We have a bit more odds than we should, but again, for A, this bad of a number generator, and B, we're only 50,000 values, pretty decent. And same thing with number of 1s and number of 20s. I should get 2,500 of those. And I ended up with 25, 28, and 24, 19. A little low on the 20s, but, makes sense when you consider, when you look at here, it's like, oh yeah, I had way more odds than evens. It makes sense that I had fewer D20s than I did D. And that is basic file handling. Again, to recap on this, the supplement to the reading material. When you open a file, you have to, if you want to open it in write mode, you have to specify that it's a write, append, or existing. If you are just opening a file for reading, you do not need to specify anything. You also need to specify if it's in text or binary. We are only doing text in this class, so there's nothing we need to specify for that, since text is the default assumption. You use write to write to a file, and while I didn't show it in here, you can use read, or read line for that matter, to read from a file. As soon as you are done with a file, you need to close it. This is for both reading and writing. And then finally, remember when you are writing your information out, it is going to be very literal about what it writes out. You need a new line written to the file. Yeah, that's kind of on you to write the new line. You need a tab, that's /T. Whatever needs to be written out, you need to explicitly say it. And with that, you should be ready now to move on to the demonstration of taking you through step by step, reading in and echoing out this file here. Until the next video.